Conference recording started. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to David Nemec's old-time baseball history and trivia. My name is IIan Blumkin, and today we're going to discuss 1948 through 1951. When we tried to do this a couple of weeks ago, we had a problem with the telephone lines because there was a tremendous thunderstorm going on here. So, welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome to both of you.
Yeah,
it's good to be here with you guys.
All four of these seasons you can spend an hour on each of them because there was so much that went on and so much exciting and new things that happened during these 4 years that they deserve a year by themselves. But we're not going to be in a position to do that. So we'll start with. We finished the last time, which Ralph did publish on 1947, which was, of course, the year that Jackie Robinson broke the color line, and the Dodgers and the Yankees played in the World Series that year, and the Yankees beat the Dodgers in 7 games, and we went through this whole discussion of this year, that year, the last time we spoke. So 1948 also had quite a number of interesting developments, to say the least. And one pennant race, which was very, very close, and another pennant race, which a surprise team came out of nowhere to win the National League Championship, the Boston Braves. I mean, they had Eddie Stanky, Alvin Dark, Benny Sane, and Warren Spahn were the two big starters, and they came out of nowhere. The Dodgers and the Cardinals both had internal problems that season and both fell off fairly far. And that was also noted in the National League. That was the year that in one of the most remarkable developments in baseball history, Leo DeRocha, who had managed the Dodgers since 1938, left the Dodgers in mid-season and went cross town to the hated New York Giants, which sent seismic shocks throughout New York and through the whole baseball world. And from what I read in Paul Dixon's new biography of Leo DeRocha, DeRocha did a number of things during the couple of months he was with the Dodgers that really drove Branch Rickey to the point where Rickey decided that it would be best to get rid of him. Did either of you read that book?
I haven't read it yet. I intend to. And, it's 1948 was really a tremendous season, all in all. And one thing about the Braves, as Al mentioned, one of the big factors for the Braves in their surprising pennant drive was the presence of one Jeff Heath, who had come up with Cleveland in the mid-1930s and always looked like he was going to be a great player, even one on the order of Williams or DiMaggio, and had some very, very good seasons, but never quite put it all together. And Heath had drifted from Cleveland to Washington and then to the St. Louis Browns. And interleague trading as such did not exist in the 1940s. And for a guy to be a big presence in the American League, as Heath was, he's one of the home run leaders in 47, and then end up in a National League uniform in 48, says more about Jeff Heath than about the era itself. Heath was not an attractive ball player to many general managers. The Braves took him on with fingers crossed, hoped that he would not be a detriment in the clubhouse. And it turned out he was far from it. He was really probably their strongest hitter during the course of the season. But unfortunately, he fractured his ankle at the very, very close of the season and wasn't able to face, of all people, his old Cleveland Indians, who surprisingly won the American League pennant in the World Series. And the Indians had also integrated in 1947. It needs to be mentioned that the Dodgers, after integrating, won the 47 pennant, Cleveland the following year, after integrating also in 47, won the American League pennant. So the presence of black ball players was having a tremendous factor already on which teams were going to come to the fore throughout the late 40s and 50s. Along with the presence of Larry Doby, who took over in center field in 1948, beating out Thurman Tucker for the job, was the presence of a rookie left-hander named Gene Bearden, who had come from the Pacific Coast League in a trade the previous year. And Bearden didn't really start out to be much of a factor with the Indians in 48, and entered the morning of September 16th with only 14 wins, which was a good total for a rookie, but by no means a high total for that time. A lot of rookies won 20 games in the 40s. Bearden did not look like he was going to win 20 games or even close to it entering mid-September. However, in the following 2.5 weeks, he won the pennant for Cleveland, almost single-handed. He won a total of 6 games, finished with 20 victories, and his 20th win came the day after the regular season ended. After Cleveland and Boston, the Red Sox ended in a flat-foot tie, with the Yankees only, right there with them until the very end. And the Philadelphia Athletics also a big factor until they folded in September. But Bearden was selected by manager Lou Boudreau, player manager Boudreau, shortstop for Cleveland, to start the key game to decide the American League pennant. And Boston had won the toss and, of course, elected to play at home at Fenway Park. And Bearden starting against the Red Sox in Fenway Park, a left-hander with the Green Monster staring down on the field, was not an attractive proposition, seemingly. But Bearden surprised, pitched a terrific game, got a lot of support from Boudreau with Boudreau's stick. Ken Keltner also was a big factor in the game, and the Indians won going away. I believe the final was, 8-3?
8-3, right.
I think it was 8-3.
Yeah, Joe McCarthy was managing the Red Sox, who had this tremendous success with the Yankees in the 30s and early 40s, started a nondescript pitcher by the name of Benny Galehouse, who was 8-7 at the time, and the Indians bombed him. They bombed Galehouse very, very early. I think Boudreau went 4 for 4 with 2 home runs in that game.
Yeah, he did, and Keltner also hit a big dinger early in the game, and the Indians were off and running. And I remember. I think you were there. Yeah, I know you were there, Al, because we roomed together in San Diego when Bobby Dorr spoke to the Sabre convention, and he talked some about how Galehouse was selected, much to the dismay of the Red Sox teammates, and how McCarthy I think was reluctant to go with Mel Parnell, which would have been his natural choice because Parnell was a left-hander. And the prospect of having a left-hander facing Boudreau and Keltner did not look at all promising. And so Galehouse ended up starting, and it proved to be a disastrous decision right out of the box.
Yeah,
and then rather than an all-Boston World Series, we had the Indians playing the Boston Braves. And the Indians were playing in cavernous Cleveland Municipal Stadium, which had never before seen a postseason game. And they played since they were the way the World Series was done then, alternate years. Whoever had the best record, or not the best record, but it was the National League every year, and then the National League's term to have 4 games at home and 3 on the road. So Cleveland only had 3 games, but in those 3 games, they set a new World Series record for attendance by a team. They had tremendous crowds on hand for all 3 games, and they won 2 of the 3, and they ended up winning the series in 6 games. In Game 6, which was saved after he pitched a shutout in Game 2, a 2-0 shutout, was saved in Game 6 by Gene Bearden. And Bearden, to my mind, was in the running for definitely should have been Rookie of the Year. There was only one Rookie of the Year award given that year, and it went to Alvin Dark of the Braves, who, as Al mentioned, was a very good shortstop and a key factor certainly for the Braves. But Bearden, to my mind, should have won it, and he may have even, they didn't. I don't think they even had a World Series MVP then in '48. Yeah, and he would have. I think he would have been in the running for it just on the basis of his shutout win in Game 2,
50,
and then the save in Game 6.
Yeah, and after that season, the biggest development was George Weiss taking over the Yankees as Yankees general manager, dismissing the manager Bucky Harris because he thought Harris had lost control of the club, and bringing in from off a pennant-winning year in the Pacific Coast League, Charles Dillon Stankel, better known as Casey. And even though Weiss and Stankel were totally different personalities, they seemed to mesh together. And they had a long relationship going back to when they were both involved with Eastern League teams in the 20s. So he brought Stankel in. And one of the big reasons that Bearden lost his effectiveness after 1948 was that Stankel managed against him in the Coast League and said, this guy can't get his knuckleballs over. So just weigh him out. And the rest of his pitches were very ordinary. So he lost he hung around for a few more years because of what happened in 1948, but he was never effective after Casey Stankel took over the Yankees.
Now, paradoxal with Bearden is that Casey recommended Bearden to Boudreau because he was still in the Oakland in the Pacific League, and of course he learned the sinker ball under Casey. And when they were looking for a pitcher, they got Bearden. And again, with Bearden, we're missing a big factor here. He was injured in World War II. He was on a light cruiser. He was in the Battle of Kula Gulf in '43, and he was forced to abandon ship. He fell from a ladder on the deck and sustained a fractured skull and crushed kneecap. It's an amazing story with Bearden because he almost single-handedly helped a pitching staff that, again, you have Bob Feller, not at his greatest. The second half would prove a little bit different, but in the first half, he wasn't as effective, Bob Feller. And then Bob Lemon was first getting into his groove to become a starting pitcher and was first learning the ropes, but he was dominating, and Bearden went along with that as well. Plus, Veck had the good knowledge, and we're missing a huge factor here, of bringing Satchel Paige in, who was effective for the Indians in the '48 season, going 6-1. I think he had a 2.48 ERA. A lot of people criticized Veck for bringing Satchel Paige on at 42, but the old guy showed that he still had a lot of spin left in his ball. Indians, one of the best years, I think, in baseball was '48. I'm reading Lou Freeman's book right now, Season in Baseball, the story of Bill Veck, Satchel Paige, Lou Boudreau, and the 1948 Cleveland Indians. And you can't say enough about Lou Boudreau because he was in a very precarious position. He was 27 years old at the time. He was a player at shortstop, like Dave mentioned, and he had to build and literally do what Casey later became famous for, platoon, because he didn't have all the tools. But it made him look like a genius. He won the MVP over Ted Williams. Williams bested him with by I think 12 points. I think Williams batted 367 or 369, and Boudreau batted 355. But that was the year of Lou Boudreau.
Yeah, one of the greatest years ever by a shortstop. In fact, whole infield,
World Series.
Big factor in '48. They had an infield of Joe Gordon at second, who'd been the MVP with the Yankees in '42. Keltner at '48, seemingly still in his prime, had a very good year. and the first baseman was Eddie Robinson. And the four of them were the first infield quartet in history to all finish with double-figure home run totals. So they were quite a formidable cast in the infield. The outfield was very patchwork. Dale Mitchell in left field had a very poor arm. The center fielder was Doby, and Doby had tremendous range, but was still learning to play the outfield. He was naturally an infielder. He come up as a second baseman. And in right field, they started the year with Walt Judnick, who they picked up from the Browns. And Judnick was a good ball player, but had lost it very early. And after the 47 season, he was already on the downswing. And before Cleveland could make a move in 48, Boudreaux realized they needed a better right fielder. He went out and got Bob Kennedy, who had a tremendous arm and was a good fielder, suspect hitter. But by platooning Kennedy and Judnick, Ian mentioned that platoon was a big factor, and so was Al. The Kennedy and Judnick platoon managed to hold down right field pretty well. And so but we need to emphasize again that in 47, Bearden hadn't made the club. He had been traded for prior to the 47 season. He hadn't made Cleveland's club, and Cleveland farmed him out to Stengel, who was managing the 9 old men in Oakland. And under Stengel, Bearden developed the knuckleball. So it's very, very weird the way it happened. Bearden came on strong and won 20 games in 48, and I'm not totally convinced that Bearden didn't. I think the wartime injuries and arm trouble, more so than Stengel, bad mouthing his knuckleball in 49 and on, was the reason why Bearden never was a major factor again on major league play.
Well, now we get to 1949, which was in both leagues. You had races that were decided by one game. The Yankees over the Red Sox and the Dodgers over the Cardinals. The Braves fell down a few rungs in the National League. After that season, they traded Eddie Stanky and Alvin Dark to the Giants, which helped make the Giants into a contender in the next few years. And basically, it was a trade that will eventually force the Braves out of Boston. But we'll get into that some other time. The Yankees, Casey Stengel, in 1949, had a real patchwork team. They lost a tremendous number of players due to injury. DiMaggio missed the first couple of months with a heel problem. Yogi Berra missed a month with a broken thumb. The only player on the team that really played the entire season for them was Phil Rizzuto. And that was the first year of the dominance of the big three from that era for the Yankees, Allie Reynolds, Vic Raschi, and Eddie Wopak. Fourth starter was Tommy Byrne, and Joe Page, who was a sensational relief year in 1947, would have another sensational relief year in 1949, which would be his last good year in the major leagues. And they beat the Red Sox in the last two games of the season at Yankee Stadium. The Red Sox had come in a one-game lead. The Yankees tied it on the Saturday and beat them on the Sunday. And Joe McCarthy again came in through a tremendous amount of criticism, specifically for pulling Ellis Kinder after when the score was 1-0 after 7 innings in the last game. The Yankees were leading 1-0. After 7 innings, Kinder had given up, I think, 2 hits, and he pulled them for a pinch hitter and brought in Mel Parnell, who had pitched the day before unsuccessfully. The Yankees got 4 runs off Parnell in the 8th inning and held on to win the game 5-3. So McCarthy managed 2 straight years with Boston and lost pennants by 1 game each season. Now, over in the National League, the Dodgers finally came to fruition with the core that would be known collectively as the Boys of Summer, with Jackie Robinson, Roy Campanella was the catcher, Gil Hodges, the first baseman, Carl Perillo, the right fielder, Duke Snyder, the center fielder, and the old veteran Pee Wee Reese at shortstop. was also Don Newcomb's rookie year. Newcomb went with 17 games, and Newcomb would stop a lot of the opposing pitchers from throwing at Robinson and Campanella because he was mean out there. If Robinson and Campanella were knocked down by opposing pitchers, Newcomb had no hesitation about knocking the opposition down. And they beat the Cardinals out by one game, and that would be the Cardinals' last being a factor in the pennant race until 1957. I think, David, we discussed this, and the thing we came up with is the Cardinal pitching staff basically got old at once. And
they had a hole at third base that they really couldn't until Ken Boyer came along after Whitey Kurowski had shoulder trouble after the 47 season. They went a long time without a third baseman. They went through a whole bunch of guys, all of who either got hurt or
they started 49 with a player named Eddie Kazak, who's actually
made the All-Star team.
And made the All-Star team and then broke his leg right after the All-Star game and was never a factor after that.
Never again the same. No, he wasn't even in the league in a couple of years. But one thing we should point out about Joe McCarthy, he had a reputation as a push-button manager while he was with the Yankees in the 30s and early 40s. And interestingly, the only two close pennant races he was ever in was 1948 and 1949 when he managed Boston. And as Alice said, McCarthy bears some of the blame for what happened to how Boston managed to lose the pennant on the last day of the season in both years.
He was
reputation, I think, should be properly tarnished as a result of it, because those were the
others. Was three others that were within a few games. 1930 with the Cubs, 1935 with the Yankees, and 1940 with the Yankees. So it's 5 times that he was involved with races that were 5 games or less, and he lost all of them.
Yeah, that's Al's added. I had forgotten about the 40 season. They were definitely right there toward the end.
Yeah. So when they call him the greatest manager of all time, I think there's a lot of for make an analogy, I think that Grover Cleveland Alexander was better than Christy Mathewson because he did essentially the same thing with worse teams.
Yeah.
So, I know with McCarthy, I'm in the minority because it's like when you try to have a rational discussion on Facebook about Nolan Ryan, and there are people out there who believe he was the greatest right-handed pitcher of all time because of the strikeouts and no-hitters. But we'll save that argument for another day. Ian, you want to comment on that, on McCarthy? Hello?
We may have lost him. Hello? You lost me.
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
I just had. Yeah, I'm here. You know, with McCartney, I'm thinking of Paul McCartney. With Joe McCarthy, I'm on the fence with him because I'll tell you why. All of his teams had a lot of success, and if you look at the Red Sox in '49, and I think David Halberstam's book, The Summer of '49, makes a great case. I mean, literally, he had to catch the Yankees, and yes, he did lose the series, the 3 games to them at the end of the season, but he was gifted. The whole Red Sox team that year gelled beautifully. You had Williams, who won the MVP. You had now Dominic DiMaggio. You had all those guys now who would be instrumental for the Red Sox for years to come. I think what did the Red Sox in was the Yankees pitching staff, because although none of the Yankees were up there in the hitting because Joe DiMaggio was injured, Tommy Heinrich or Phil Rizzuto, they weren't up there, but their pitching was. And going back to Cleveland, remember they got Allie Reynolds from Cleveland the year before. I mean, he went 17-6. You got super reliever Joe Page, who went 13-8 with 27 saves, and you had Vic Raschi, who was 21-10. So I think what helped Casey in his first year as a Yankee manager was his pitching staff, because he did have to platoon. As for McCarthy, I can't say, yeah, he lost two of the probably the biggest years ever, but even if he was a low-key push-button kind of manager,
Wasn't
he had
low
the talent
key.
to win. You don't think it was low-key?
No, not at all. No. There are a lot of guys. I never talked to a lot of guys, but I have talked to some who played for him, and most of his players didn't like him, and he had some personal problems, and he certainly had a tremendous drinking problem, and his career was short circuited actually. He could have stayed in the National League with the Cubs, but the Cubs didn't really want him around after the first couple of years. And if he hadn't landed with the Yankees, I think his career as a major league manager would have been relatively short.
Yeah. Also, one thing in 1949, which because I did years ago, I did some work on this season. The Red Sox was so tailored to Fenway Park. They went 61-16 at Fenway Park and 35-42 on the road. Just think about that. There's a 26-game discrepancy between the home and the road. And if you look at the splits on the players, with the exception of Ted Williams, all of them were very, very dominant at home and very, very ordinary on the road. But and that was also a year that the Detroit Tigers in the American League were the only pitching staff that had more strikeouts than walks. That was only a few.
We really should touch on this because this is a very important factor in what happened in Major League Baseball. The walk totals went through the roof, particularly in the American League in the late 40s into the early 50s. And I think the strike zone, we've talked about this before, that the strike zone, even though it's never been actually established that this was true, we can all speculate with pretty firm ground beneath us that the strike zone was different in the National League than it was in the American League. And because the Philadelphia A's, they had an extraordinary amount of walks, picked up an extraordinary amount of walks in 48 and 49, led by Ferris Fain, who won 2 batting titles in the 50s. And these guys were not power hitters that were drawing, they were Eddie Juice, Fain, they were drawing really high walk totals year after year.
Yeah, the A's set the record, 1949, for double plays with 217, which I learned about from the first Tuck and Thompson Encyclopedia in 1951. And then when I started looking more deeply into this 30 years later, I discovered that the A's pitching staff in 1949 had 5 pitchers that walked over 100.
Yeah.
It was a record at that point. And so, of course, they set a record for double plays because the opportunity was there.
No, and then we really one player we should touch on was terrible Tommy Byrne for the Yankees, who when he was on, it was like a little girl with a curl in the middle of her forehead. When he was on, he was one of the best pitchers in baseball. He had year after year. Although he wasn't always a qualifier, he would lead All-American League pitchers in the fewest hits surrendered per 9 innings, and with incredibly low totals. But when you added his walks into there, his whip totals were always, almost 1.5 per, 1.5, around 1.4, 1.6, and whereas his hit totals were like 0.6. An incredibly wild pitcher, and gave Casey Stengel probably more, sleepless nights than Casey deserved with that team.
Well, also in 1949, the Dodgers won the last day of the season to beat the Cardinals out by 1 game. Jackie Robinson won the batting title and Most Valuable Player award that year. A couple of other firsts that he accomplished, and the Yankees beat them in the Dodgers in 5 games in the World Series. The first game of the World Series was a scoreless duel between Allie Reynolds and Don Newcomb. to the bottom of the ninth inning where Tommy Henrik hit the first walk-off home run in World Series history.
Yeah, that was. I remember listening to that game.
Yeah, another development in 1949 was that the players in the Mexican League who wanted to come back, the players that jumped to the Mexican League in 1946, and one of the lesser players, Danny Gardella, brought a suit, and baseball decided to settle the suit, and they allowed the Mexican jumpers to come back in 1959.
And some of them became key factors, even though they'd been out of organized baseball for a couple or 3 years. Those like Sal Maglie came back and became really, really helpful pitchers. And even some position players came back strong. But Maglie was, I think Maglie was the best of them. I don't know, is there anybody else who was even close?
And so we got to 1950, which is another wild year. In 1950, in the American League, the Yankees won the pennant with 98 games. The Indians won, the Red Sox won 92 games and finished fourth. The Tigers.
No, the Indians fourth.
The Indians were fourth with 92, excuse me. The Red Sox were third with 94, and the Tigers were second with 95. So you had the first four teams winning over 90 games. There was a 25-game gap between the fourth place Indians and the fifth place White Sox, and you had a number of hitters that in the American League who turned out to be Hall of Famers or great ball players like Larry Doby, Yogi Berra. Almost everybody hit over who was any much bit of a hitter in the American League hit over 300 that year. And the Red Sox as a team scored over 1,000 runs and hit 302. The Red Sox had two games that year against the Browns at Fenway Park where they scored a combined total of 49 runs, including a 29-run game. So the hitting shoes were really, really on that year. Early win.
But the Red Sox were the last team ever to hit over 300 for the season, weren't they?
Yeah. Early Wynn, who was in his second season with the Indians, went 18-8 and led the American League in ERA with an ERA of 3.20, which is, nowadays that's totally unheard of to lead the league with an ERA like that. And in the National League, you had the Whiz Kids, the Philadelphia Phillies, who had been in the doldrums since 1917, put together a very young team with two eventual Hall of Famers, pitcher Robert Roberts and center fielder Richie Ashburn, and they held off the Dodgers in the last weekend of the season to win by 2 games. Phillies suffered a big blow when their ace left-hander Kurt Simmons was called up by the military in early September of that season, and one of their other starting pitchers, Bubba Church, was hit in the face with a line drive off the bat of Ted Kluszewski, and they staggered to the end. And the last game of the season at Ebbets Field, the Dodgers had a runner, Cal Abrams, that was thrown out at home plate with the winning run in the 9th inning. At the top of the 10th, Dick Sisler, the son of George Sisler, the 3-run home run off Don Newcomb to propel the Phillies into the World Series, where they got swept by the Yankees in 4 straight. All the games were fairly close, but the Yankees just had
very close. It was an extremely tight series, even though it only went 4 games.
Yeah,
Phillies just couldn't do anything with the Yankees pitching staff. And although the MVP for the Phillies was a pitcher, Jim Constanti, the first relief pitcher ever to be voted the MVP, and the Phillies were so hard pressed for starters going into the series since Roberts had pitched the last game of the season and his arm was fraying as it was, that even before that game, they had to start Constanti in the first game, starting, a relief pitcher. He hadn't made a start all season, I don't think. And, he lost 1-0. So, it was, that's the way the series went for the Phillies. They just couldn't hit.
Yeah, they also, in the third game of that series, started a pitcher named Ken Heinzelman, who had been 3-9 in the regular season.
And don't forget Ted Williams.
Yeah, Ted Williams broke his arm broke his elbow in the All-Star game.
And I think, he missed the second half of the season due to the
7 runs in half a season.
Of it, yeah.
They would have challenged the Yankees again, like they would have done the year before, if Williams was healthy. I think that's very important.
Yeah, the big problem with that was that after Mel Parnell and Ellis Kinder, they really didn't have very much in the mound. And the Yankees still had Rashi Reynolds and Lopat, at their peaks with the Yankees. And halfway through the season, they brought up this kid named Whitey Ford, who would proceed to go 9-1 for them, and then wind up winning the fourth game of the World Series. And then having to go into the military service right after that season ended. But Berra hit .322. Phil Rizzuto was the MVP in the American League that year, hit a .324, which is by far the highest average he ever hit for in the season. And Bauer hit .320. Everybody in the American League, you just take a look at the averages of the individual players and the batters in the American League that year. You see almost everybody hitting over 300, and most every power hitter having over 300 total bases. It's truly a hitter's year in the American League.
Let me ask you guys something. With Rizzuto, with DiMaggio, again, we go back to Joe McCarthy and Casey Stengel. Why were the players who played under Joe McCarthy so against Casey Stengel and so dedicated to Joe McCarthy when Stengel came into the Yankee organization?
Well, they were both Rizzuto and DiMaggio were pretty far along in their careers when Stengel took over. And
I don't know that they were dedicated to McCarthy. I never really heard that. I think they were opposed to Stengel initially. That definitely is true, because Stengel came in with no rep at all as a major league manager. He'd done very, very, he had no reputation based upon his managerial, efforts with the Dodgers and the Braves in the 30s. And he won the pennant with Oakland in '48 in the Coast League, and that propelled him to the major league job. But the Yankees, I think, as a team, were very, very leery of bringing this guy up from the minors, who had a reputation as kind of a clown. So I agree, you're definitely right about that, Ian, that he was not looked upon with fondness when he first took over in the dugout. But I don't know that they ever really had that much respect for McCarthy either.
Yeah, DiMaggio's skills started to slip after 1949. He had a year in 1950 where he had a rally to put up the numbers, and Stengel once one game tried to put him at first base and took him out of the cleanup spot. Anybody who realizes anything about DiMaggio, he had a very, very fragile ego. And he was just silence. Yeah.
I spoke about that. I spoke about with Marty Appel the other day because I had him on my show about Casey Stengel. Two things he did. One, he benched DiMaggio for one game, and two, he put him at first. And DiMaggio was just ripped over it. He just couldn't contain himself, but Casey let him know, I'm the manager. I'm going to do this.
Yeah, after 1950, he played that last season of 1951. His skills had almost totally declined.
Yeah.
One of the scouting reports of the 1951 World Series that the Dodgers came out with, of course, the Dodgers, as we'll get into in a minute, forgot to make that World Series. Said anytime a ball hit to DiMaggio, the runner could run. The runner was on base, the runner could move. Because DiMaggio had no arm left. And frankly, if you look at DiMaggio's career, his record, his numbers after the World War II were not nearly as good as they were before.
No, they were good, but they weren't those of a superstar by any means. Although he was MVP in 1947, undeservedly, I think.
Yeah. And I think Rizzuto, I think what happened with Rizzuto is a story. I don't know whether it's apocryphal or not. That Stengel Rizzuto went out to try out for the Dodgers, which Stengel was managing in Brooklyn, and Stengel told him to go get a shoe shine box. He was too small.
He never forgot that.
Rizzuto always would mention that. I don't know whether it actually happened or not, but Rizzuto still remembered that when Stengel came to. Of course, Stengel came to appreciate Rizzuto, and he had Bill Dickey make Yogi Berra into one of the all-time greatest catchers. And until Stengel came there, nobody wanted to pitch to Berra because all he could call for was fastballs because they would run on him like crazy.
Yeah.
And once Dickey found Berra as an apt pupil, and they turned Berra into one of the top defensive catchers of his era.
So do you think if it hadn't been for Stengel arriving in '48, that Berra may have become a full-time outfielder, and he never would have made it? He never would have made it as a catcher. I always wondered about that.
Good catch. Berra would have been the first to admit that. He always said Bill Dickey learned him all his experiences.
Yeah.
That's one of the great Yogi quotes of all time. But no, I don't think Yogi ever would have achieved the heights he did as a catcher had Stengel not become a manager and brought Dickey in as a coach.
Also, the fact that the Yankees didn't have a whole lot going at catcher in the late, but they traded Aaron Robinson to the White Sox, and the Lopat, wasn't he in the Lopat deal?
Yeah.
So Robinson went. They had guys like Charlie Silvera and Houck, who really never could hold down a first string job with any American League teams. Although none of them really. They both and a couple of other catchers, like Gus Nyerhoff, stuck his bench behind Berra, but none of them ever had a job elsewhere in the major leagues of any length.
Oh. The only one that was there for a little while was Sherman Lawler.
Yeah.
Sent him to the Browns, and the Browns sent him to the White Sox, where he became one of the better catchers in the American League in the 1950s. So.
I forgot. Yeah, Lawler. Think about Lawler. If he'd stayed with the Yankees, would he have become the regular catcher and Berra been put in left right field? It's quite possible.
Now let's get to 1951, which in New York was the year to end all years when you had the three teams in New York, one with the American League Championship and the other two tied for the National League Championship when the regular season ended. The Giants, who started to come alive in 1950 when they finished third, started off terribly in 1951. And they made DeRocher, who was running the team then, made a couple of big moves. He switched away Lockman from the outfield to first base and put Monty Irvin, who was playing first base, and Hayden to the outfield. Then in May of 1951, they brought up this outfielder from Minneapolis who was hitting .477 by the name of Willie Mays. And they had a very good pitching staff headed by Sal Madley, who came out of nowhere the year before to post an 18-4 record and would go on to post a 23-6 record for the Giants that season. Larry Jansen, who also won 23 games. Jim Hearn, who won 17 games. And a spot reliever by the name of George Spencer, who would have the only big year of his entire career. And the Giants got very, very hot in August. They were 1 point trailing by 13.5 games. They won 16 games in a row. And people were still speculating on whether or not they were aided by a buzzer system in their home games. And the Dodgers, under the magnificent leadership of Charlie Dressen, faded in the last 2 months. I have a few theories on why they faded. And I think Dressen was mostly responsible for that. They had burned up all the relief pitching by August, and I think one of the things that happened to the Dodgers is that the regulars got tired, because just like Leo DeRocher with the 1969 Cubs, Dressen insisted on playing his regulars every single game. And there was no rest for the weary. That's what I think that was a determining factor in why
the Dodgers played. They did play decent ball. They played respectable ball in the last 2 months. And in an ordinary season, given the lead they had, they would have won going away. But the Giants just put on a stretch drive that I don't think has been equal before or since. And they just were incredible the last 6 weeks of the season.
Well, Clyde King was a very effective relief pitcher for the Dodgers in the first half of the season, and then they brought up Tom Labine, who was doing very well, and he disobeyed a Dressen order in a game in September 1951 against the Phillies, and gave up a grand slam home run to Pitty Head Jones. He went to Dressen's doghouse, and Dressen didn't use him until the second game of the playoff series, where he had no other choice. Labine pitched a shutout. And when Newcomb got into trouble in the final game, who do you have warming up in the bullpen? Branca and Carl Erskine, both of whom were starters. He had absolutely no relief pitchers that he could call on the last month of that season, or would call on the last month of that season. And Newcomb had, his arm was falling off at the end of the season. So they wound up, it was a combination of a lot of things between the Giants and the Dodgers. And the Yankees wound up beating Cleveland by, I think it was 5 games. Allie Reynolds pitched 2 no-hitters, including no-hitting the Red Sox right at the end of the season, which was the game that clinched the pennant for them. It was Stengel's third straight pennant, and they were making the transition from Joe DiMaggio to Mickey Mantle, from Bobby Brown and Billy Johnson at third base to Gil McDougald, from Tommy Henrich at first base to a combination of Joe Collins and Johnny Mize. And he had brought along the outfielders Gene Woodling and Hank Bauer. So basically, one of the biggest things about the Yankees' 5 straight championship is, outside of the 3 starting pitchers, Rashy Reynolds and Lopez, and Barrett and Rizzuto, it basically turned over the whole rest of the team without losing anything.
Al mentioned Johnny Mize, and we should take a minute here to look at what another thing that happened when Stengel came on the scene in 1949. Yeah, the Yankees began a very mysterious way of doing business late in the season that no one has ever really been able to analyze, I don't think, thoroughly. Beginning in 1949, Mize arrived from the National League. We talked about interleague trading not being even in existence then. Was waived by the entire National League. He'd been with the New York Giants starting the season, and was still a very good power hitter. Just 2 years away from big 51 home run season in 1947. Was waived into the American League. Became a Yankee property toward the tail end of the season. In 1950, 51, 52, into 53, Mize remained with the Yankees, and meanwhile, other National Leaguers started arriving too. Johnny Hopp, Johnny Sane. Almost every September, the Yankees would acquire these guys in mysterious waiver deals. from National League teams. And analysts have never really, as I said, never really been able to point to how this happened. And I'd be interested. Well, what do you think about those deals?
I think that basically there were gentlemen's agreements, not to interfere with the waiver procedure.
Not to interfere with the Yankees. Is what it amounts.
The Yankees also got Ewell Blackwell from the Reds in 1992,
right.
But he was already done. Yeah, he didn't help them at all. He was just, it took him a couple of years to leave the majors, but he was essentially finished when they got him.
But Sane still had good pitching, some good pitching out of him.
Sane helped him out for 3 years.
Yeah.
Seasons, and Hop was a good pinch hitter for a couple of seasons, but they were able to Weiss operated essentially the same way with Rickey. The Yankees had the best farm system in the American League, and they would trade their surplus for players that they thought that they could help them right away. They got Bob Cazava, who was a nondescript pitcher from Washington, and Cazava would wind up saving the final games of the 1951 and 1952 World Series. Yeah, and they got rid of Jackie Jensen, who was surplus in 1952, essentially for Irv Noren. But Jensen would never cut it with the Yankees because they didn't like the way he fielded. And they were able to do this. They ran the American League almost as well as the Dodgers at that point were running the National League.
But the Dodgers weren't making deals like that, waiver deals out of nowhere.
No.
But, it was hard to believe that every National League team would pass on someone like Johnny Mize, allow him to go to the American League. Since the Yankees were off the American League, every American League team had to pass him too before the Yankees could claim him off waivers.
Yeah, the only American League owner who was really ready to challenge the Yankees during that period was Bill Veeck. In 1951, he brought the Browns, and he probably would have challenged for Sane, but they had no money.
No, they had no money and they had no future.
And no future, yeah.
They could have picked up Christy Mathewson, Walter Johnson, and Pete Alexander and made them the top three starters, and they still would have finished deep in the second division with the team they were putting on the field. But we should mention one player they did put on the field very briefly in 1950. Eddie Goodell, who came in as a pinch hitter, a midget, was hired by Beck as a publicity stunt, and he in the second game of a doubleheader came into bat in I think in the very first inning.
I'll detail of that because I did a post on it yesterday. Somebody put up a picture of Eddie Goodell on one of the Facebook groups I'm in. I put that old number 1A. That was his uniform. And it was August 1951. He pinch hit for a outfielder named Frank Saucier, who was a very good minor league hitter who never could cut it in the major leagues. He walked on 4 pitches, obviously. Was run for by Jim Delsing, who was an outfielder that had a fairly long career.
Also, former Yankee.
Yeah. And the pitcher was on Detroit, who was the opposing team, was Bob Kane, who the only other thing he's really famous for is having a double one-hitter with Feller in 1952, where he beat Feller 1-0. And the catch was Bob Swift. The home plate umpire was Ed Hurley, and the Browns manager at the time was Zach Taylor, and they brought the contract out showing that he was legally signed to the contract. And, of course, when this happened, the baseball establishment went absolutely crazy. And
probably there were about 650 witnesses to this at the game that day too. The Browns were drawing; they drew in 4 even.
And 19,000, the biggest crowd they had in years.
That day, had 19,000 that day. So something must have drawn to the park, and maybe they got wind of what Beck was up.
It was a full staff. I think Bill Vex said in his book that they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of Falstaff beer or something like that. So, and they had Gaydell jump out of the cake.
Yeah.
Prior to the doubleheader, obviously not realizing that he was actually going to participate in the game, and he led off. And they went crazy. They showed them the contract. They showed them they had the roster space to bring him up. And it was just, and then they banned Gaydell after that game. Will Harridge, the American League president, banned Gaydell. And Vex said in his book he thought that was very big of him since he only signed him for one game anyway. And it just drove them nuts. There was also a campaign that lost fire very quickly to wipe the bat out of the record books. But
fortunately they didn't, because that's one of the most memorable moments to me in all of baseball.
Yeah, it was two things. Absolutely don't know where the Tigers, who had finished the strong second the year before, the whole team basically did nothing. One of their star pitchers, Howden, went into the Army for the season. They just fell completely apart, and they finished a bad fifth.
But up to that point, we'll get into this next time we talk, the Tigers were the only one of the 16 extant franchises in 1901 that had as yet never finished in last place, and that still held true through the 1951 season.
Yeah. Going back to the Giants, obviously, any real baseball fan, a true baseball fan of the era, has studied the the Bobby Thompson game, third final game of that playoff series, and it's just that the Giants came through when it counted. A little story in that one. Alvin Dark left the bottom of the ninth with a single, and Gil Hodges was holding the runner on with a 3-run lead. And Dressen came under a lot of criticism for that because Don Mueller hit a ball which supposedly had Hodges been playing his normal position, he would have turned that into a double play. So I counted Mueller at a card show in 2001. I asked him about that. He said, I was a duck hunter. If he had been playing regularly, I would try to hit the ball to center field. Mueller thought he was always robbed of the credit that he thought he deserved during that inning.
Yeah, I remember Mueller was nicknamed Mandrake the Magician just because of his back control. So I think Mueller was telling it like it was.
And Thompson said he was able to gather himself a little bit because on Whitey Lockman's double, Mueller slid into third and broke his ankle. They had to get a stretcher to carry Mueller off the field. Thompson said he was able to get himself together a little bit because of that delay.
It was a weird inning, all in all.
Yeah, and in those days, there was the Giants, who had just come off this incredibly emotional pennant drive, had to start the World Series the next day. There was no break like you have now. They had to play the Yankees, and they won 2 of the first 3 World Series games. And the 4th game was rained out. There was no off days because in those years in the World Series.
The Subway Series.
Especially since it was a Subway Series. And the Yankees won the last 3 games in the World Series to win their 3rd straight 4 games to 2. In the last game, 6th game, the Giants were losing 4-1. They put a couple of men on base. And Stengel brings in Bob Kazava, who's a left-hander. They're playing the game in Yankee Stadium. And the 2 runners on base eventually scored on sacrifice flies. And then he got the last out, Salazar's lined out to Hank Bauer, right field. And they asked Stengel why he brought in Kazava. He says, because I knew that Thompson and Irvin would hit beautiful 400-foot flies to the outfield. Death Valley was the reason he brought Kazava in. And Casey knew pretty much what he was doing, all the time in those years.
Let me ask you guys this.
Yeah.
We cannot contribute the 51 Giants' success without Leo DeRocha. And I had Paul Dixon on my show, and he told me this. DeRocha changed his managing style. He saw what had happened in Brooklyn. He was not as fiery as he was in Brooklyn. And especially when he left the team, Willie Mays was crying. He's like, I'm losing my father, Monty Irvin. Look, when we talk about Leo DeRocha, we have to talk about circumstances that aren't quite kosher. And in 51, DeRocha had that whole spy thing where he would have the spyglass in the center field, read the catches, the opposing catches signs, a push button from the center field was hooked up to the dugout, and DeRocha would know what was coming. Now let me ask you this. It's been proven that even if Bobby Thompson knew what was coming, or if he didn't know, wouldn't have mattered. That's the whole thing. Wouldn't have mattered with this whole cheating thing that went on in 1951.
I think it's way overblown. You know, most hitters I've talked to, I've never talked about this specifically with any former major leaguers, but I know from, my own experience playing that most guys really don't want to know what's coming. They don't want to be tipped because for two reasons. One, if the other team gets wind that you've been tipped, they're going to cross you, and they're going to cross you with a high and inside pitch, and that's not what you want. And number two, even if knowing what's coming makes a lot of hitters overeager and overconfident, and batting is such a fine art. It's you really need to have all of your skills, all of your senses, everything concentrated on the pitch itself, not upon what you know about what's coming, not about concentrating on signals telling you what's coming, but it's you and the pitcher. It's a one-on-one battle, and I think that whole thing is just it is overblown, and I think the Giants were just a better team toward the end of the season.
How about you, Al?
I agree with David. Also, if you look at the Dodger hitters, particularly Snyder and Furillo, fell off quite a bit the last month and a half of that season. Basically, if you look at how many games these guys played, and even when they had the huge lead, they didn't get a day off. I mean, their bench wasn't all that good. I mean, they got Papko in midseason from the Cubs to plug the left field hole at that point. But, the bench consisted of, Wayne Terwilliger and Don Thompson and, players that were not very, very good or able to step in for any length of time in any of the regulars' shoes. And they only won that last game of the regular season against the Phillies because of the superhuman efforts of Jackie Robinson, who made an incredible catch off Eddie Wakers with the bases loaded in the last game in Philadelphia to keep the tie, and a home run in the 14th inning to win it.
Yeah.
And it was just, if you look very, very closely, and he had Furillo leading off in the playoff games. Furillo in the 3 playoff games went 0 for 14.
Furillo was not a guy who drew a lot of walks. No. But moreover, the important thing may just be to look at the Giants' home record in 51, and it really wasn't all that. It really, I think I don't recall specifically what the totals were, but their home and road records weren't that different. And they would have had a tremendous superiority at home if this was really a factor and influence.
The Dodgers had trouble with the Pirates, who were finding their way with Ralph Kiner into a 7th-place finish. They had trouble with them. I think the Pirates either split the season series or won at least 10 games off the Dodgers that year. There's a lot of things that it's a season that can be analyzed from now until the end of time.
Yeah. No, I
All right,
agree with
John.
Al.
I think we've done a better job covering this today than we did 2 weeks ago when the phones were crashing every couple of seconds. So I want to thank you both. And
I want to thank you both too. It's been a pleasure once again to be with you.
we'll be back again.
It's always good to be with you guys. It's an honor to be with such great baseball minds like yourselves.
Thank you. Thank you both. Okay. We will be back next week, same bad time, same bad channel. Thank you both. Good night, everybody.
Take care, bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care.